This is Al Chapman interviewing Jimmy Earl Burt, B-U-R-T, who was a witness to the Tippit slaying on Friday, November the 22nd, 1963. At that time, Jimmy Earl lived at 505 East 10th Street, at the corner of Denver and East 10th on the northeast corner. I'll let Jimmy tell you in his own words what transpired on that day.
Well, me and Bill Smith was riding around and listening to the parade on the radio in the car. We decided we'd go home and watch it on TV, and we sat there a while watching it and got uninterested in it, so we went out on the porch and was talking about it. So we noticed this guy walking down the street, just someone walking, you know, and then we...
Where was this person, on the other side of the street opposite you?
Yes, he was across the street,
on the
south side of town.
Which direction was this person headed in?
West.
He was headed west on East 10th.
Right.
So he was coming from the direction of Marsalis Avenue.
That's right.
And walking west on East 10th. All right, and then tell me what happened after that.
Well, my wife came out and told us that President Kennedy had just been assassinated, and we didn't believe it. We kind of laughed it off. So we stood there talking a minute, and we started in the house to watch it, and we noticed the policeman pulled up and talked to this guy. And, well, he pulled up and he reached over and rolled his window down.
Well, tell me now, Jimmy, did you keep this person, did you have him in your eyesight all the way down East 10th?
No, I didn't.
Didn't, you were standing talking on the porch, but you're sure that this is the same guy that passed the street a little earlier?
Yes.
Right, go ahead.
Well, like I said, we started in the house and the policeman pulled up and he rolled his window down. The guy walked over and...
He rolled which window down?
The one on the opposite side.
Opposite side from the driver?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the guy walked up and put his hand on the window and bent down to where he could talk.
And he put his hands on the car?
Yes, he did.
And bend down in the window so he could talk?
Right. And they talked for a minute. We stood watching, you know, just curious. And then the guy, he just backed off, you know. We thought it was fixing to let him go, you know. So we started on in the house, turned our attention away and started in the house, and then we heard the shots. And we turned, and I told Bill, I said, Bill, that guy just shot that policeman. We could see him out in the streets, you know. So we ran down there, and about the time we started down there, well, this guy ran.
Which direction did this person head?
West.
He headed west and...
Then he turned south on
Patton Street. All right. And so what did you do when you got down to where the officer was shot?
We stood there a few minutes, you know, looked at the body, and then we decided I told Bill...
Which way was the officer? Was it laying face up, face down, or what?
He was laying on his stomach on his face laying on his side.
On his side. Did you notice any bullet wounds or anything?
Yes. One in the side of his head. In his
side of his head. So he was laying with his left side of his face toward the ground, and you noticed a bullet wound in the right temple, do you think, or what?
I think that's what it was.
All right. Did you know the officer?
Yes.
You knew Officer Tippit before this time?
Yes, I did.
But you didn't know it was him before he was shot?
No.
Right. How long have you known Officer Tippit?
About 3 or 4 years.
Did you consider him a good policeman or what?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. I think you made the statement to him a little earlier. Y'all called him Officer Friendly, right?
Yes, he used to.
All right. And so this was just a few seconds. You ran down there and saw who it was. And did you notice anybody around at the time, or anybody that you knew, or how many people do you remember being around at this time?
Well, there was a couple of people standing across the street from where his car was, and then there was a couple of people over on the other corner, on the corner of Patton and 10th.
Would that have been the southwest corner or the northwest corner? Northwest corner, all right. So you and Bill Smith went down Patton Street. How far down the street did you go? Did you see the person in question anywhere down Patton Street towards Jefferson?
No, I didn't.
Didn't? How far down the street did you go?
Well, it didn't go all the way. We just went down to the alley, and I had in my mind to go all the way to Jefferson, but we got to the alley and we just kind of come to a stop and looked down the alley, and we saw this guy down there.
How far down the alley was he?
He was down almost the next street. Might say at the next street.
Next street. So he would have been, say, behind the church at Crawford in East 10th.
Right.
And that is a parking lot behind the Texaco filling station that faces on Jefferson.
That's right.
Right, all right. So what did you do after you saw the person standing down in the alley? Did you make an attempt to go after him or what?
No. He had a gun and we didn't have anything, so...
Then what did you do?
We just stood there for a minute, and the guy was going on, so we turned around and come back to the scene. By then, there were policemen gathering around.
Did you tell anybody you'd seen the person down the alley?
Yes, but there was trying to, but there was a crowd, you know, and everybody was talking to the policemen and telling them this and that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Had the ambulance gotten there yet?
No.
Ambulance had not. Were there sirens going? Could you hear sirens around at that time?
Yes,
or?
I could.
What happened then?
Well, someone said that that the guy was down at the library, which is on Jefferson, and that's between Marsalis and Denver on Jefferson there.
Right.
And we talked. They started running down there, so we followed them, and they went inside, searched the place, and we stood out on the lawn and came back out and said no one was there. So we came back down to the scene where Officer Tippett was killed, and just before we got there, we could see the ambulance. And by the time we got to the scene, they was pulling off with.
The ambulance was carrying him off at that time.
Yes.
And what happened then?
Well, everybody stood around talking and still going on, a lot of noise.
Did you give your name to anybody or anything, tell them that you were a witness to the shooting?
Well, everything was starting to thin out right after the ambulance left, and so we got where we could talk, you know. We talked to this plainclothesman, I don't know whether it was city or FBI, but we didn't tell him our names at the time. We just told him where we lived, over on 10th Street.
And when did they come to see you?
The next day.
Which had been on Saturday.
Right.
Right, and how many were they?
2.
Were plainclothesmen?
Yes.
And did they identify themselves, or do you remember, or?
Yes, they identified themselves, but I can't remember.
Was it FBI or city police, right? All right, and what did you tell them at that time?
Well, just what I just told you.
You told me. Right. Did you tell them you'd seen it happen, and did they ask you anything about the direction the man was coming from, or if you could identify him, or what?
Yes. No, they asked me if I could identify him, and I told them no. I mean, that...
Okay, on Saturday, they had been captured, right?
Yes.
All right. Had you heard that they had had the man that was supposed to kill the policeman? Did you know this at the time when they came out to see you on Saturday?
That they had captured him?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
But had you seen a picture of the person that they had arrested?
No.
Had you seen it on TV or anything?
No.
And when was the first time you saw a picture of Oswald?
At the time he was killed.
At the time he was killed, right. All right, now then, what did you tell these 2 plainclothesmen that you were talking to on Saturday?
Same thing, just what I saw, you know, and that we came down and all that.
All right.
But they didn't talk too much. They didn't say anything, you know, just ask questions.
Right. Did they take down anything at that time?
No. Right. Just our name and address.
All right. Now then, you say you were in the Army at the time, stationed at Fort Polk, Louisiana?
Right.
Right. And what did they say about this?
Well, they said they'd contact me later, and I told them that I'd be at Fort Polk. I had to be back on a Monday.
Monday, that coming week, right, right. And when did they come down to Fort Polk and talk to you?
I think it was on a Tuesday, or somewhere about the middle of the week.
All right, and then what happened then?
They asked me the same thing that they'd asked me at home, just, you know, what I saw. And
was it the same men?
No.
Mm-hmm. Do you know where they were from, or did they identify themselves?
Yes, they were from Shreveport.
Shreveport, Louisiana?
Right.
Right. And what happened at this meeting on Tuesday or Wednesday of the next week?
Well, they just talked to me for a few minutes, you know, and they didn't take down anything then, or no memos or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They just said, well, we'll come talk to you later, contact you later.
All right. And when did they contact you later?
That weekend.
That weekend?
Mm-hmm.
And where did they contact you at?
At my mother's house in Belmont, Louisiana.
And what happened then?
Well, they talked to me for a while out in the car, and they asked me when I had to be back, and I told them I'd be back that night. And they said, well, we just carry you back down there.
What day was that, do you remember?
It was on a Sunday.
On a Sunday, all right.
Yes.
So you rode back with the 2 plainclothesmen to the Fort Polk?
Yes.
And then what happened?
Well, we got down there, and then they made me tell my story 4 or 5 times.
And how long did they question you at this time?
About 3 or 4 hours.
3 or 4 hours.
Yes.
Did they make a tape recording or take notes or write it down or what?
They took notes.
Took notes.
But they didn't record anything.
All right. Did you sign anything?
No.
Did you tell them at that time that you could not identify
Yes.
the person that you saw as being Oswald? Did they ask you this?
Yes.
Did they say, can you identify this man as Oswald?
Yes, they did.
And you said what?
I said I couldn't.
You said you couldn't. Do you have any idea what your friend Billy Smith might have told them?
As far as I know, they never talked to him anymore.
Never talked to Billy. And where is Billy Smith at this time?
Bluff, Arkansas.
Do you have an address for Billy?
No, I don't.
Can you get me an address for him?
Yes, I can.
All right. So you talked with him 3 or 4 hours on a Sunday, then practically a week later after the killing of Officer Tippit.
Right.
Right. And they talked with you 3 or 4 hours. And what did they tell you after they got through with you?
Well, they told me they'd contact me later, but they never did.
And this was roughly around December the 1st, 1963, right? Well, you've never talked with anyone since?
No.
And you cannot identify Oswald as being the man that shot Officer Tippit?
I cannot.
And the person that you saw that shot Officer Tippit was walking from Marsalis Avenue in a westerly direction on East 10th.
Right.
And it's the same person that shot Officer Tippit. Okay. I certainly appreciate it, Jimmy, and we'll be contacting you later.
Okay.
This is Al Chapman, who you heard interview Jimmy Earl Burt, B-U-R-T, who now lives at 404 East 10th in Dallas, Texas. This is the address at which Officer Tippit was shot in front of this house. There's a few things I would like to say here that Jimmy was in a hurry. He took time off from work to go home to his apartment and make this interview, so we didn't get everything on that we wanted to. There's a few things I'd like to go over. Number one, Jimmy's age at the time that Officer Tippit was slain was 20 years old. Jimmy was born November the 18th, 1943. He is now 24 years old. Jimmy told me that he figured the time it took from the time that he ran from his front porch with his friend Billy Smith down to where Officer Tippit was shot, and he said at this time Officer Tippit's pistol was in the holster. It wasn't laying on the ground or laying underneath him. It was in his holster. But the length of time it took for them to run from the front porch down to where Tippit was shot and view the body a few seconds, then run down to the corner of Patton and 10th and turn south and go halfway down Patton towards Jefferson Boulevard, where the alley started in a westerly direction. When they saw this person that shot Officer Tippit down in the next block, which would have been at Crawford Street, they saw him going on, he said, at this point. They didn't want to chase him because they didn't have a gun or anything, and they were afraid to. They turned and went back to Patton and 10th and back around to where Officer Tippit was laying. And there was a crowd gathered there at the time and a lot of policemen around, so they certainly got there pretty fast. And someone said, well, he's over at the library on Jefferson Boulevard between Marsalis and Denver. So everybody runs around over there, and while the police are inside searching the place, while they stood out on the lawn, and the police come out and say that the guy wasn't in there, so they all go back around to where Officer Tippit was laying. And Jimmy said at the time that they approached the scene of the Tippit slaying that the ambulance was pulling off at this time. And I believe that the record states that the ambulance arrived at 1:19, so they probably will give them a minute to put the body in the ambulance and go on to the hospital. So this would put it roughly around 1:20. Jimmy said that he figures it would have taken from the time they ran from the front porch and did all of this and back to when the ambulance was leaving a good 5 or 6 minutes. So this would have put Officer Tippit being slain somewhere in the neighborhood of 12, 13 minutes or so after 1 o'clock, which would certainly not be enough time for Oswald to get from his apartment and approach the scene from coming from the east to the west on East 10th from Marsalis Boulevard. He also said that the person put his hands on the right side of the car as he leaned down and talked in the window. So certainly there should have been some fingerprints on the squad car, and I don't remember reading or anything about them finding Oswald's fingerprints on the squad car. So I just wonder if they did check the squad car for fingerprints. I would imagine that they did. Jimmy also said that after they viewed Tippett's body for a few seconds, as they ran from his porch down to the scene, they ran on around on Patton Street and down to where the alley was, halfway down between East 10th and Jefferson Boulevard, that there wasn't anybody from coming from Jefferson Boulevard up this in the direction of East 10th. Said there wasn't anybody on the street or on the sidewalk. And he said they had intentions of running on down to Jefferson, as you heard, but they stopped at the alley and looked down and saw this person down in the next block, which was west from Patton Street. So there wasn't anyone in the street at all. And I believe that the testimony says that a couple of men in the car lot across the street, north of Reynolds' car lot, said they immediately ran out on the sidewalk and saw this person with a pistol waving it in the air coming down towards them and then crossing halfway down the block over on the other side of Patton and then on down to Jefferson and around and towards the Texaco filling station west on Jefferson. So it must be two different guys because Jimmy Earl said that there wasn't anybody on Patton Street at this time when they ran around the corner and viewed the person in the alley. So somebody is seeing two different people. Maybe it was a plainclothesman or somebody with a pistol that was going on around and chasing after Oswald or whoever it was at the time. But anyway, it certainly looked like two different people that these people are seeing at the time. When I told Jimmy Burt what the Warren Commission had to say about Oswald's path when he left the scene of where he supposedly killed Tippett and ran down Patton Street and around the corner on Jefferson and down to the Texaco filling station and then crossed back through to the parking lot behind the church, between the filling station and the church. He said that he didn't know anything about that and he never had read it, but he didn't believe that the person that shot Tippett would have had enough time to have taken that path because he said they trotted a block down to where Tippett was laying on the street and was just there a few seconds and then went on around the corner and they didn't see anybody in sight down towards Jefferson. And they did see the guy down the alley in the next block west down there behind the church. So he didn't believe that that person would have had enough time to have taken that path to be where they viewed him down there in that length of time for them just running, say, a block and a half. And the path that they said Oswald took, he would have had to have run roughly 2 blocks and a half to be at that spot. So this is just another discrepancy and a coincidence. The time my interview with Jimmy Earl Burt took place between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. Wednesday, February the 7th, 1968, in his apartment at 404 East 10th. I'm now at home, and it's 11 p.m. at my home that I'm making this special part here.